Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Best in the Biz, the pod talking business with CNA entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Ian MacDonald, and today we have Charlene Brophy. Welcome, Charlene.
Thank you, Ian. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking out of the time for the 2024 NLOWE conference. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do so.
Awesome. So, you're CEO and founder of Fonemed. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So we are a telemedicine company. So based in Newfoundland, we run the 811 health line operation here in Newfoundland. So anybody who's experiencing symptoms or needs advice or prescription refills and so on and so forth, they call 811. And we are the people behind the 811 number. So we've got registered nurses, a team of registered nurses right throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, who respond to the calls from 811 and provide care advice. And then we've got 64 nurse practitioners as well who we can escalate calls to if individuals need to be prescribed medication or need refills and they don't have a physician attachment and so on.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So that's based in Newfoundland, but that's only a small piece of what we do because the bulk of our business is throughout the U.S. and international as well.
Okay.
So in addition to the service side, providing advice with registered nurses, we do the exact same business for the private sector in the U.S. So we've got nurses licensed in every state throughout the U.S., clients in every state throughout the U.S., and then we got a relationship with a physician group with physician licensure right throughout the U.S. as well. And so we manage roughly around 100,000 patient-related phone calls every single month with our network throughout the U.S. and Canada. And then many years ago, we spun, realizing that we didn't have the technology to allow us to grow. And that initial spur to change came when we had patients on biometric devices throughout the U.S. who were checking their oxygen saturation readings and blood glucose, but we couldn't receive the alerts simply because our system that we were using was archaic. So we hired a group of software engineers and developed our own technology, which has now been installed right throughout Canada and the U.S., but in Bangladesh and Manila and the Philippines and several sites throughout the Caribbean, and last year into Singapore as well. We're looking at a second site in Asia right now at present as well. So it's been good.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. That's awesome. It sounds like you're doing really important work as well. I mean, healthcare in rural Newfoundland especially is really difficult. It's a lot of challenges. So this seems as a really good solution to a lot of that stuff as well.
It sure is. And it's the same issues everywhere.
Exactly.
The same issues that we're having in Newfoundland, we're having in Southern Oregon, and we're having in Singapore, and we're having in Manila. It's access to care.
Yeah, for sure. So starting out in your career, I understand you started out as a healthcare aide and then into a nurse. So how did that affect your business and how you got started and kind of framed your business?
Right. Somebody had to tell me 30 years ago that I was going to be a CEO or an entrepreneur. I would have thought, no way, I'm a nurse because I always loved being a nurse.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a very small town of 300 people in Fermuse on the Irish Loop here in Newfoundland. And at that point in time, for a girl growing up in an Irish Catholic family, you had two choices, really three choices after high school. You could be a teacher, you could be a secretary, or you could be a nurse. So I decided I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be either one of them. So I started off doing a health aid program at the College of the North Atlantic.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that was my humble beginnings, and I started to work at a local nursing home, Hoyles Escazone at the time, and providing direct patient care. And I loved it. I really and truly did love it. And, there was all kinds of tasks that people would say it's, meaningless or maybe beneath a person or whatever the case may be, but nothing ever was. And I remember one day in particular, I was in, and one of my assigned tasks, believe it or not then, was to wash out bedpans before you put them into the autoclave in preparation, to cleanse them for the next patient and so on. Yeah. So as I was doing so, interestingly enough, the medication cart was also in there, and the head nurse on the floor was just kind of chatting. I'd been there for about maybe a year, 2 years at that point. And she said, Charlene, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, is this what you always want to do? And I said, I always want to be a nurse. And she said, do you want more than this now? Because you can go back, And she said, if anybody is capable of doing more and being more, it's you. And she said, it's not telling you what to do because we love you here, but if you ever decide to go back and pursue your RN and BN and you know, move into a direction that you could have more influence, she said, I think you should think about it. And I thought about it. And my mother had always wanted the same thing. But, you know, when you're young and you start getting a paycheck and you're independent, it's like, oh, God, do I want to go back to school again?
Yeah.
Anyway, back to school I did. And then, you know, the rest is history. I kind of started off, I continued on at bedside nursing in an emergency department in a very busy burn unit at the time here in St. John's, and moved to Toronto and worked in acute care there as well. And decided to move back to Newfoundland from Ontario. And at that point in time, I had walked away from my pension and my public, you know, system work and so on. So there was this brand new startup called Fonemed. And I didn't know a heck of a lot about it, but I had experienced firsthand during my hospital days some of the challenges individuals in remote communities had accessing care, especially in the burn unit, because patients came in with significant injuries and their loved ones who lived, you know, hundreds of miles away could probably only get in once a month when they found a ride. Yep. And I thought, how great would it be if we could provide some of this service at a distance instead of having the burden on patients? Anyway, long story short, I joined the company just as they were getting off the ground. We had one client, a patient in Oregon, who didn't have enough individuals using the emergency room to keep it open after hours.
Wow.
So at 11 o'clock they closed. We started to answer the phones, and very, very slow growth in the beginning, to the point that we were wondering how we were going to keep the doors open. We started to share space with AT&T in the old Fortis building. They'd go home at 4 p.m. and we'd come in, and we couldn't afford to keep paying the nurses. So I went to the other group and I said, of early investors, and I said, I really believe in the vision of where you're going, but we're not going to keep going if we don't do something. So I said, how about in lieu of salary, I take ownership in the company? And then any entrepreneur will tell you, once you got some skin in the game, everything changes.
For sure.
And so I worked 3 other jobs at other facilities to keep supporting my family and feed my 3 kids at the time, and took some ownership. And I tried to become as creative as I could to grow the business. So initially I started with our current clients and said, I will give you 3 months free service if you can get another client to sign on for us in your area. And that's kind of how it initially grew, just from word of mouth, organically, from one client to another, referring, and I giving them a break because we needed to staff it 24/7 anyway, so why wouldn't I give it away?
Yeah.
It wasn't costing me anything extra, and it just made sense. So we gradually grew, and it's funny, even today, 26 years later, the bulk of our growth today is still organic from recommendations of current clients. And then in 2009, we bid on and took over the provincial health line here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And at that point in time, I was spending about half my time in California, which is where our corporate office was. So I moved everybody to Newfoundland. And we ran and still do today, all of our executive team, our leadership team, and all of our software development and support teams. Everybody is located here in Newfoundland running the international business.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important component, is having everyone here. And it also gives you that, you know, I think a little bit of an edge, because Newfoundlanders are known for their kindness, and, you know, that's exactly who you're going to want to talk to at the end of the day.
Absolutely. You wouldn't believe how often I travel, and especially throughout Canada, like in Toronto or Vancouver, and I tell my story and people go, wow, imagine you did all that despite the fact that you live in Newfoundland. And I say, I did all of that because I live in Newfoundland.
Exactly.
And we're a small province who needs to be able to spin quickly. And when we identify an issue in a community, we're quick to raise our hand and say, we can help with that. And in many cases, we can help with that with current resources at no additional cost to the province. So why wouldn't we?
Exactly.
And, you know, that's how we've grown and still do to this day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You talked about the technology piece a little bit more. Would you want to expand on that? Because, I mean, technology is always changing. You got AI coming in now. Are you using AI? Are you trying to expand your technology more and more? We
are. You know, every day, and everybody asks me, you know, what do you worry about? And I always say I worry about remaining relevant. And in every industry, in every business, every leader is or should be thinking about, are they going to be replaced by AI of some sort, and what can we do to make sure that we're, number one, containing our costs and using the technology to our advantage to provide a layer of service that can be provided with technology and back-ending it with humans. So, for example, in my business, a lot of the work we do now is, we've got probably 80 people who answer the phone calls now. That's going to go away. So we're really starting to push people towards the app to self-queue. So individuals will be able to, download this app, self-queue themselves for callback, put in all of their medical history and allergies and so on. And it makes, number one, for a more efficient call flow and this, cost savings there.
Of course.
But for the patient as well, not having to, wait to give the information and somebody to type it into a computer system and so on. It's immediately available and accessible.
Yep.
And then by doing so, number one, that's a cost saving there on the front end. And then once the patient, is ready to access the healthcare advice services, we've built in a symptom checker. So for example, if somebody is calling with a headache, then they will receive a series of questions on the app. They'll answer these questions. And it may be that they may not need to speak to a nurse at all.
Wow.
It may be that will be able to manage the call. Or it may be if they say something that we've got built into the back end of the AI technology. If they say something that's, could potentially be a high-risk situation. Let's say it's somebody calling with a real bad headache and have also got a stiff neck. Now, those two symptoms alone, especially if there's a fever, would make somebody think, well, that could be meningitis. So then we've got either be a prompt, say, 1 moment, please, I'm going to connect you directly with a registered nurse. So we've got that built in, so the safety guards are there to be able to identify high-risk situations, while at the same time, we're utilizing the technology to cut our costs and provide a more efficient call process.
Fantastic. And like you said, it's a win-win for everybody.
Oh my gosh.
It streamlines it for you folks and also customers.
It does.
Which is so important.
Yeah. And even for accessing, I know in Newfoundland now we're talking about giving individuals access to their own healthcare reports and records, which we should have, because how can we ever empower individuals to be able to be accountable and responsible for their own healthcare unless we empower them with the information they need?
That's right.
So we've enabled through our app as well for individuals to be able to receive lab requisitions, to be able to receive prescriptions and so on. And then once we order blood work and diagnostics, they can go in and look at the report, which they should be able to do as well.
Yeah, most definitely.
And, to enable consults and so on to other, healthcare disciplines. So we're using the AI in every way, shape, and form it can be utilized so that we're providing to the people that's going to use our service as the most efficient, operation possible.
Perfect. It seems like AI is certainly a beneficial
it's
factor.
Top of
for
mind
you
every day.
folks. Yeah. That's awesome to see. It's one of the first times I've talked to a business that has actually really utilized AI and really put it in their main operating pretty much every day.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And most people, individuals, are not even aware they're using AI. So if you access our services online, you're going to get a pop-up that looks just like a registered nurse that even talks in a Newfoundland accent.
Wow.
You would think but still, it does introduce that they're not. They're a chatbot, and they're there to help guide you and so on. But it's that connection that helps people. And for us, the biggest piece, because we all know we call these toll-free numbers and you just keep getting the message repeated over and over and over. We've built the back end so that never happens with us. So if somebody says agent or nurse or need help or whatever, it immediately transfers over. So I always say that everything we design, the design of all of the technology is human-centered. And what I want my experience to be when I'm using it is what everybody wants their experience to be.
Exactly. That's so important. Very, very important. So bringing it back a bit to talking about your growth and how you expanded into all these different countries, it's really exciting. Do you have any tips when expanding, say, into the United States or any other country that you've expanded into?
Oh gosh, we would never have enough time for me to tell you all of the stories and all of the lessons that I've learned over the years. And it was really interesting. We're here today at the Newfoundland and Labrador Organization of Women Entrepreneurs talking about women leadership and entrepreneurship and what that looks like and some of the sacrifices. And, it still drives me insane that we still have to talk about women in leadership positions. But even to this very day, if I walk into a room with one of my male staff and somebody introduces me as the CEO versus them, I can always still see a little bit of the shock factor on many people's faces to go, oh, she's the CEO and not him. It's almost funny, and I do find humor in it now more than anything.
Yep.
And the sad reality is we need to still keep talking because there's not enough women in leadership positions now. And until we get the playing field to an even level, we need to keep talking about it. But so many of the lessons that I've learned over the years, if I look back 25 years ago and trying to get this off the ground, and we were really, back then, remember, we had no Canadian presence. I was sitting here in Newfoundland running a U.S. operation and talking about how to expand into the international markets because, as you can well imagine, a private company trying to gain some ground in a publicly funded healthcare system 25 years ago.
That's tough.
It simply was not happening.
Yep.
So our growth was all throughout the U.S. and internationally. What was really interesting is I was the only woman in an executive position. I was the only female owner, and I was the only female board member.
Wow.
So you can only imagine back 25 years ago some of the challenges I had to try to say, no, we shouldn't do this, or I believe we should go after that population and so on. And in fairness to the other investors who were all U.S.-based, to them, I was this nurse who was living on a small island in the middle of the North Atlantic in a publicly healthcare funded country that they thought knew very little about, the U.S. market, international opportunities, and so on. And I didn't know a lot of things that I should have known. And I was too embarrassed and too ashamed to ask for help. And if I didn't know, sometimes I would agree with decisions that they made because I didn't want to challenge them or sound like I wasn't knowledgeable and so on. But we made so many mistakes. And I think, today when I talk to entrepreneurs that are getting off the ground and they're always afraid of taking chances and so on, I say don't be afraid of failing because there's not one business owner out there who hasn't failed. And for most of us, failed miserably. And I've did that over and over and over again. And one particular case, one of our former investors had a good friend in Venezuela who decided, well, you know what, Venezuela's really struggling with bringing physicians and keeping physicians there. We could bring this into there. So spent millions of dollars moving into Venezuela as the country was falling apart.
Wow.
I didn't know enough to look into, what the economic situation was at the time. I didn't know about the public unrest that already existed. And as I was en route to Venezuela to get our first center off the ground, I received an alert from Air Canada saying Canadians are warned against traveling to Venezuela because of. And the day prior, a Canadian who was riding a motorcycle had his hand cut off so that they could steal a watch. So that's what I was thinking.
Oh, my God.
This is where I'm going on my own to get this center off the ground. So I didn't go. And what happened is not because of my visit didn't go, but the whole country fell apart.
Wow.
And our operation that we had invested heavily in totally fell apart and went nowhere. And I thought I should have, looking back, I wish I had raised my hand and went, hang on now, has anybody asked some of these tough questions that needed to be asked? So one of the important lessons is do your own research and make sure if you're trusting sources, make sure they're a trusted source. And for entrepreneurs today who are just starting and afraid to take a chance, I always say you never know the outcome of the chance you didn't take. And the worst thing that could happen is you're going to fail. And if you fail, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you look around the corner for the next opportunity. So many of those lessons that I could tell you that I've learned over the years. That's why to this day I still talk about being a woman in business because we didn't talk about it then. Yeah.
Yep, and it's so important, like you said. And this conference is a great showcase for that.
It is.
The vibes here are so good; they're very high. So it's nice to hear these stories and bring these to the forefront.
Yeah, so it really and truly is. I mean, Newfoundland is a great place to do business. We're a small, connected community. If there's something I need now or an opportunity that I want to pursue, I know somebody in every single sector and every single industry that I can pick up the phone and call. Where else in God's name could you ever get that?
Exactly.
You simply couldn't. I mean, it's a great place to do business. If I hear that they can't staff an emergency room in Burgeo or in Harbour Breton, I can pick up the phone, call the Ministry of Health and say, do you want our nurse practitioners to cover that? And we've grown them now to 64 nurse practitioners in 6 different emergency rooms throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. And then we listen. Every day I read the news and I go, there's an underserved population. So we determined that because there's so many unattached patients in Newfoundland, that individuals who are on medications for ADHD and other controlled substances couldn't get them anymore. They were turning to street drugs to manage their symptoms because they couldn't get a physician to prescribe. So we picked up the phone and called the ministry and say, what if we started a managed care program for these individuals? Because it's really important with the specialty population such as that you have a longitudinal relationship with the patient.
Definitely.
You don't want anybody just calling where there's no relationship and so on. So we assigned practitioners to manage that particular patient population. And now all of a sudden we got this underserved population who previously did not have access to care or medication refills and so on. Patients who broke their backs 30 years ago who couldn't get their pain meds refilled. So of course they're turning to street drugs. And how wrong is it for us as a population to allow that to happen? But you know what? In Newfoundland, like nowhere else, it works. If there's a problem, we pick up the phone and we call and we say we're here to help. And very quickly we can move. And that's what I love about Newfoundland. So when people say you need to get out of here in order to grow, I say no, it's the polar opposite. You get in here and you get out and start offering a solution and then take that national and international. That's what worked for us, and it's worked 25 years ago and it's still working today.
That's awesome. There's so many lessons there.
Oh, yeah.
So many. Where to even begin? I mean, like you said, there's a lot of people falling through the gaps.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're taking that and making it an opportunity, and also, having a personalized touch to that.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like you said, I feel like that's the Newfoundland way in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's so important for those people.
Yeah.
So it's really great to hear that. One thing I did want to talk about, we always like to talk about successful moments, and I'm sure you've had tons of successful moments over the course of the business. What would you say one of the most successful moments you've had is, or the time you look back and it always brings a smile to your face?
I have them every single day of my life. I came in here this morning and I opened up my email and I had an email from a patient to say, just want to let you know that I used your service. This was the problem. I left the emergency room because I couldn't get in. And within 14 hours, I had a call and an appointment with your nurse practitioner.
Wow.
And thank God, and it's been diagnosed and treated. Like, I have those moments every single day of my life. And I think that's why for those of us who care for patients, for nurses and for physicians and for, lab technicians, technologists and pharmacists and so on, anybody in the allied health professional world, anybody who provides care to patients, it's really hard to come home at the end of the day and not feel good about yourself, because you touch somebody else and you help them in a way, whatever way that was, and it makes such a difference. But for me, I do that every single day, and our people do that and we hear these stories all the time. So I have so many wonderful moments. Probably the proudest moment ever was the day when, I didn't shut down the California office because I still have such a large population there, but I don't spend as much time there anymore. But it was probably the day when I realized that every one of our executive and leadership positions were right around me in our St. John's office, that I thought, wow. And they said it couldn't be done. And here we are serving 40 million people right throughout the world with a team who sits all around me on Crosby Road in St. John's, Newfoundland. And I thought, how friggin' great is that? Or other moments like when 9/11 happened, and a lot of people don't know this about Fonemed, but one of our clients at that time, and still is a client today, was Beth Israel Medical Center, which is now Mount Sinai, the largest tertiary care center in New York City.
Okay.
They were a client, and we were just providing service to their patients after hours for their family practice unit. So they called after second plane hit and said, we're sending all of our calls to you. We're sending all of our frontline staff down to see what's going on and help as they can, and then said, don't send anybody to the emergency room unless it's life or limb.
Wow.
And so the phone just lit up. We had our nurses work 28 hours around the clock. But sadly, the phone calls weren't coming from patients, weren't coming from individuals who were in the World Trade Centers or other buildings. They were coming from family members because they couldn't get through. At the time, the cell towers were the telecommunication system was so different then. So they couldn't get through to their husbands or their wives or whatever the case may be, but they could get through to Newfoundland. So the calls were coming in saying, my husband is a police officer, a firefighter. He was an accountant working in the World Trade Center. I can't reach him. Can you try to reach him? Can you see if he's called? Is he okay? That's the kind of calls we had. Or people saying, my apartment is filled with smoke. Do I leave? Who was, right down in epicenter. Do I leave? And we had no idea what was happening. We were watching as the rest of the world watched, and we were saying, don't leave. Because the street wasn't any safer. We said, close your windows, turn off your air conditioning units, put wet towels around your windows and doors, and turn out your lights and stay low. And that's all we could do. And just to be a voice on the phone and to say, we'll call you if we get any further information and so on. Yeah. But, at the end of that, when we finally saw the outcome of what had happened and the devastation that had happened, and we kind of looked around at each other, and it was one of those moments of, well, we did something. We did the little piece that we could for those people who at a moment in their life, they couldn't have even imagined such a tragedy. And it was like an aha moment for all of us. And we still talk about it to this day today because many of them staff are still with us today.
Yeah, and as you would. It's a fantastic story.
It is. Yeah.
I mean, like you said, trying to help in any way possible. Those phone calls, I mean, for the family members.
Oh, my gosh.
To talk to someone. That's so
life
important,
altering,
right? It seriously is.
Yeah,
it seriously is. And like you said, you still have them as a client today.
We do.
Which
all these years, and I still go visit them often.
There you go. Right, that shows their commitment and shows how much they appreciated those calls. Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for most of the questions here today. So thank you very much for coming on once again.
My pleasure.
Would you like to share your socials for Fonemed?
Sure. So our website is probably the easiest way to access any of us is probably www.fonemed.com, or you can just look us up on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or all of the Twitter and all of the other social media lines, and you'll find us.
Perfect. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. Good luck and keep up the good work. I love that you're talking to entrepreneurs and sharing the success stories of Newfoundland. Good on you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So many great pointers from Charlene. Here are some of our favorites. 1. See potential for personal growth. From health aide to CEO of an international company, Charlene is proof that more is possible. It's easy to be dissuaded from pursuing further education and training, but the long-term gain can far outweigh the short-term pain. If you see a future for yourself beyond what you're doing now, you need to invest in it. 2. Find the strength in where you're from. Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, is small and connected. Often, if you ask, help isn't far away. 3. Leverage technology for better service, much like Charlene did with Fonemed. 4. Persist. Despite achieving tremendous success, Charlene still notices looks of surprise when people find out she's a CEO. She reminds us to keep talking about the need for diversity in leadership and to persevere through discomfort and doubt. Charlene also tells us to persist through failure. There isn't a single business out there that hasn't failed at something. Not one entrepreneur who hasn't made a misstep. Learn through the failures, get back up, dust yourself off, and look for the next opportunity. And with that, that's a wrap for Season 3. Thanks again to NLOWE and all of our guests for making this season possible. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on our podcast, shoot me an email at ian.macdonald@cna.nl.ca. We'll be back for a new season in January. Until then, thanks for listening.